shaping up to be one of the most unpredictable general elections in living memory. As the parties fight for every advantage, we bring them together for the Daily Politics election debates. We've been through the manifestos, and now we'll put to the test some of the people who want to form the next government, wield influence over it, and make the big decisions about the issues that will affect all of our lives after May the 7th. Welcome to the Daily Politics election debates of 2015. I'm Andrew Neil. Today we're focusing on the economy. It is, of course, one of the defining issues of this election. It spans everything from the state of the public finances to the size of your pay packet. And today the party spokesman will be debating this crucial area of policy. Chris Leslie is Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Dick Newby is a Lib Dem Treasury spokesman. David Gauke is the Conservative Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Patrick O'Flynn is UKIP's Economic Spokesman. And Stewart Hosie is Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party. Plus, I'm joined by the BBC's Economics Editor, Robert Peston. Now, in a moment, our politicians will be setting out why they believe they've got the right answers in this important area. But first, a reminder of what's at stake. The recession that followed the financial crash may be fading into history, but the health of the economy remains central to this election. The UK is still forecast to borrow £75 billion in 2015-16. That will be added to our national debt, which this year is predicted to cost £46 billion in interest payments. When it comes to growth, the UK has pushed ahead of its rivals. GDP grew by 2.8% last year, making it the best performing of all the major economies. But after a long squeeze on living standards, disposable incomes have only recently returned to where they were back in 2010. The UK is experiencing a jobs boom, with employment at its highest since records began in 1971. But critics say too many of these jobs are poorly paid, part-time or insecure. So, looking to the future, which party has the best plan for making sure growth continues and is felt up and down the country? And who will be honest about the tax rises and spending cuts that will be needed to tackle the deficit? In the next hour, you decide which of the parties has the best policy for the economy. Well, just before we came on air, our politicians drew lots to decide the order in which they would make their pitches. Chris Leslie was the lucky or unlucky winner. So, Chris Leslie, please take your position. Chris Leslie is Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He was also the coordinator of Gordon Brown's leadership campaign way back in 2007.
Here's the question. Are you and your family getting a fair deal as things stand? If you're earning over £150,000 a year, you've done very well out of the Conservatives. But for the rest of us, they've raised VAT, wages haven't kept pace with bills, and public services face ever deeper cuts. Yet this hasn't cleared the deficit as they promised. And this is the problem. A low-wage economy with an epidemic of job insecurity means a higher welfare bill and collapsing tax receipts. Instead, we need a government on the side of the majority. Incentives for a living wage, more childcare for working parents, cutting business rates for small firms. Because if working people succeed, then Britain as a whole succeeds. That's the better way to cut the deficit and ensure you get a fairer deal.
Chris Leslie, you became an MP at 24. All you've done outside Parliament is work for the think tank. Exactly how are you qualified to run the economy?
Well, I did run the new local government network. It was a research organisation in local government for 5 years with a £1 million turnover, employing 15 people. But, you know, I know very well from representing my constituents in Nottingham that they are not getting a fair deal from the economy right now. And I want to make sure that we focus on living standards so that everybody gets a fair share. OK, Chris Leslie, thank you. Dick Newby is a Liberal Democrat peer, and he is the party's Treasury spokesman in the Lords, as well as being the Deputy Government Chief Whip.
Liberal Democrats went in government in 2010 to turn around the economy and get a grip on the nation's finances. We've done this with record numbers of people in work, robust growth and the deficit halved. Now we must build on these achievements. We'll eliminate the structural deficit by 2017-18 and then grow spending in line with economic growth. We'll protect spending on education and health whilst eliminating the deficit through things like a new tax on banks and a tax on high-value properties. And we'll deliver another tax cut for lower middle earners worth around £400. We will borrow less than Labour and cut less than the Conservatives. Fairness and responsibility, a government with a head and a heart.
Dick Newby, when you were a student at university, you used to let Peter Mandelson borrow your essays. Is this a prelude to the Lib Dems working with Labour after the election?
I don't think in itself that's going to do the trick in persuading either the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats to go into coalition. We'll see what the maths show, and then we'll have negotiations after that.
But he was copying you.
Well, he was reading them. I'm not sure whether he copied them. I never saw the output.
All right, thank you. David Gauke has been Financial Secretary to the Treasury since last year, but he's been a minister at the department under George Osborne since the 2010 election.
5 years ago, we inherited an economy in crisis. The outgoing Labour Treasury Minister summed it up best when he said in his note, "There's no money left." 5 years on, our economic plan is working. 2 million more people have the security of a job. We've halved the deficit as a share of the economy. Families will be better off this year than they were in 2010. I'm the first to say that there is more to do, but abandoning the plan now would put all the progress we have made at risk. I say, let's stick to the plan. Let's not go back to square one.
David Gauke, which of the two awards do you value most? Is it Pin-Up of the Month from the Taxpayers Alliance or Tax Personality of the Year at the Taxation Awards?
Well, there are some who argue that the Tax Personality of the Year is perhaps a contradiction in terms, but, well, in politics, you take the awards if you can get them. It's a rare privilege to receive anything.
Very well. Thank you very much. Patrick O'Flynn is UKIP's economic spokesman and has been one of the party's MEPs since last year. He used to be political editor of the Daily Express.
After years of austerity, the British people deserve to have money put back in their pockets via tax cuts. We will take people on the minimum wage out of income tax by raising the personal allowance to at least £13,000. We will lift the threshold for the 40% tax rate to £55,000 and we will abolish inheritance tax. We can afford to do this while sticking to the Treasury deficit elimination schedule and investing more in key public services like the NHS and defence, because we alone are prepared to take the axe to politically correct spending. Over the course of the next Parliament, we would spend £100 billion less than these other parties represented here on foreign aid, net EU contributions, HS2 and the Barnett formula. So we alone can afford to give the British people the incentives to create a dynamic new economic era.
Now that Richard Desmond has donated £1 million to UKIP, can we take it that there will be no more taxes on late-night adult television channels?
Well, Andrew, our whole tax and spending plans were set out in our manifesto, as you know, and we were the only ones to have it independently costed and verified.
But did it cover adult television channels?
It didn't. I have no proposals to share with you on that today.
I'm sure Mr Desmond will be very happy. Thank you. Stewart Hosie is the Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party. And he's also the party's Treasury spokesman here at Westminster.
A vote for the Scottish National Party is obviously a vote to make Scotland's voice heard at Westminster like never before, but it's also to deliver progressive change for people across the UK. The SNP are the only party offering an alternative to Westminster cuts. Our proposals for a modest 0.5% increase in public spending will allow us to invest in the NHS and other vital public services while seeing the deficit and debt fall throughout this Parliament. We believe that's necessary and fiscally sustainable. We simply can't afford another 5 years of cuts, so our plans will grow the economy and lift the squeeze from ordinary people.
In the event of a minority Labour government, will you be the Scottish tail wagging the Ed Balls dog?
No, this isn't about tails and dogs being wagged in any direction. This is about democracy. If the polls are accurate, and they deliver the votes and seats that the parties expect to win, then we're all going to have to come to terms with the new landscape, simply work with each other in the best interest of the people.
OK, Stewart Hosie, thank you. That's the opening statements. Let's get down to the debate itself. Chris Leslie, let me come to you first. We've got zero inflation, a falling deficit, the world's fastest growing advanced economy, record levels of employment, tumbling unemployment, and now even rising living standards. Labour denied any of that would happen. You've just been proved to be spectacularly wrong, haven't you?
Well, no, and I think we've had, over the course of this Parliament, 3 years where we didn't get any growth at all, and that caused not just
what
problems
3 years
for
were
living.
they?
Well, that were the 3 years from 2011
No,
to
the
2014.
ONS figures show there's been growth in every year of
Well,
this Parliament.
if you think that this has been spectacular growth,
No, you said
I
there's
would
been no
disagree
growth.
with
I tell you, 1.9 in 2010, 1.6 in 11, 0.7 in 12, 1.7 in 13, 2.8 in 14. Growth in every year, an average of 1.75. No growth.
And substandard growth has caused real problems, not just in terms of the public finances. We've left with 200 billion more borrowing than George Osborne said we were going to have. That's why he hasn't fulfilled his promise on the deficit. But in terms of living standards, for most people, the majority of people up and down this country, their wages haven't been keeping pace with bills. And that is also one of the fundamental problems why people are not feeling the benefits of the recovery.
But my point is that you've got it wrong. In 2011, you were talking about the danger of reverting to a recession. It never happened. You predicted a double dip. That never happened. You said on jobs and growth the government had badly failed. That didn't happen.
The Office for Budget Responsibility made a number of those forecasts.
And it was wrong too.
And they were wrong in the way that George Osborne was wrong about his borrowing predictions. He got those catastrophically wrong, and that's why we're still faced with a situation of a deficit of £75 billion this year.
Stewart Hosie, you also oppose the government's economic plans at every step. You've been just as wrong as Labour, haven't you?
No, I disagree entirely. I think the point you make from the ONS figures is that growth was stifled in the early years of this Parliament. And we had the information today, I think, from Professor Ren Lewis at Oxford University, the Professor of Economics, who actually confirmed austerity has stifled growth. But the key thing about what we've seen over the past 5 years is the plan was supposed to deliver credibility. The promises were very clear indeed. Debt would fall as a share of GDP. The structural deficit would be wiped out and borrowing would be barely £20 billion this year. Debt is not falling as a share of GDP and borrowing is almost 4 times that promised at £75 billion.
You wanted the government to borrow more anyway, so what's your problem?
Well, the problem is that we needed a plan to have a medium-term deficit consolidation, tackle us over the medium term, not the short-term cut-and-run approach of the Tories and the Liberals. And if it was designed to deliver credibility, it failed precisely because none of the economic targets were actually met.
All right. David Gauke, the raison d'etre of this government when you came to power was deficit reduction, and you've only got a bit of the way there. You've not got nearly as far as you said you would.
Well, it's worth looking at what the OBR have said as to the reasons why the deficit didn't fall as quickly as we had hoped and the OBR had predicted, which was because of the economic challenges caused by the Eurozone crisis, the after effects of the financial crash, high commodity prices at that time. But had we not taken the action that we had, we would have been borrowing very much more. Our debt would have increased much more dramatically, and we wouldn't be on course, as we currently are, to have debt falling as a proportion of GDP this year.
But by 0.2%.
Yes, but nonetheless
After
falling
5 years, 0.2% of GDP.
Yes, having inherited the largest deficit in our peacetime history.
No, but you were talking about debt.
Yes,
and you've added about 600 billion to debt.
The two are clearly related. If you've got a very high deficit, which we had, then your debt is going to increase. But we are now able to bring debt down as a proportion of GDP. We will continue under our plans to do so every year over the course of the next Parliament. And by 2018-19, we will have a surplus on our plans. And what you've heard from Labour and the SNP, and they're pretty aligned on this, is that they won't be, under their plans, they won't be delivering a surplus then. They won't be delivering a surplus at the end of the next Parliament. We will continue to be borrowing, and that's a big risk for the economy.
Robert Pesce.
I mean, we're obviously going to come back to this whole discussion of public spending and the debt and deficits, but I just wanted to ask, actually, Chris Leslie and Stewart Hosie a question, both focusing on the importance of getting living standards up. The City, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs are saying that because of expectations that Labour would spend a bit more than the Tories, borrow a bit more than the Tories. The Bank of England will feel obliged to put up interest rates earlier than would otherwise be the case. Now, as you know, the indebtedness of households in this country is still at very, very high levels. And, you know, if people are worried about their living standards, what they're particularly going to be worried about is, you know, our mortgages going up, our interest rates going up.
Chris Leslie.
Well, first of all, I'd take issue with you that there's one sort of universal view in the city. I've seen Citibank, for example, today have published